I don't allow anybody in this house to disrespect my wife. I'm not going to stand for anybody to talk to her that way, because part of my role as a husband is to protect her and make sure that she receives the honor and the respect. It's so important to begin the lessons about respect in the home, because that's where every lesson that's going to endure is really going to happen. And so if you're raising a son and you want to teach that son respect, then you've got to start by modeling that kind of respect in your own marriage if you're married. For those of you who are in a home where you're there with your wife or there with your husband, by the way you treat your spouse, you're showing your son how he should treat women. And for that matter, you're also showing your daughter what she should expect from men. And so men in particular, guys, listen to me for a second. We've got to be so mindful and so intentional about the way we're respecting our wives, the words that we're using, the tone and the tenderness in our voice, because guys, sometimes this is a blind spot. We might think we're being respectful, but there's a harshness to our voice that we've got to be mindful of. We need to be respectful at all times and in all ways, because your sons are watching that. Your daughters are watching that. And for that matter, your wife deserves it. Even if there are no children in the house, your wife deserves that kind of respect even when nobody is watching. And so model it, but then also teach it. Take that next step and say, now son, I held the door for your mom. It was a sign of respect. And I want you to be that kind of man as well. Or son, I want you to behave in this kind of way. Or to praise him when he's doing the right things, cheer him on, because all guys will respond to being cheered for, and they'll continue to do that kind of behavior. But at the same time, there are going to be times you have to step in and correct and say, now this was probably a blind spot for you. I'm sure you didn't mean it this way, but when you said this or when you did this, it could have sent a message of disrespect, and here's why. And I just want you to be aware of that, because I know you're an honorable and respectful young man, and you don't want to send that kind of message. So when we're looking for opportunities to help steer him in the right direction, to cheer on the right behavior, and to give some gentle correction when he's out of bounds, those lessons are going to go a long way. These important lessons about teaching our sons to respect women, they're going to look a little different depending on the age and the maturity level of each kid. What you're going to teach your 4-year-old son about respecting girls and women is going to look different from what you teach your 14-year-old son. And that's the dynamic we have at home. We've got 14-year-old, almost 15-year-old, a 12-year-old, an 8-year-old, and a 4-year-old. So we've got the full spectrum, and the conversations look drastically different, but the themes and the truths are really the same, just like the way that we should teach the Bible. The Bible is equally true and applicable to everybody, whether they're 4 or whether they're 94. But the way that you teach it to a child is going to look a little bit different depending on his or her age and stage of life. So specifically in this area of teaching respect and teaching respect for the opposite sex, I think early on the conversation just begins by celebrating gender as a gift from God, that God made you a little boy. And that's a beautiful part of his plan for your life. That doesn't define the totality of who you are, but he made you a boy because he wants you to be an honorable and brave and courageous man someday. And these little girls you're playing with, he made them girls. Your mommy, he made her a little girl because he wanted her to grow up and be a courageous, brave woman and a wonderful mommy the way that she is to you guys. So letting them know that God makes us different and distinct, and that there's beauty in those differences and distinctions, and we can value and celebrate femininity and masculinity in a world that is so confused by those concepts. As they get a little bit older, it's time to start introducing the themes of sex and how that plays into it, because from an early age, our kids are being exposed to messages about sexuality. And the culture has a pretty aggressive agenda in teaching our kids the wrong message, the destructive messages, as it relates to issues like sex and sexuality. And so we need to start those kind of conversations usually earlier than we're comfortable doing, because just in the nature of what our kids are learning and the technology, they're being exposed from a very early age to a lot, and we need to let them know, I want, as your parent, want to be the safest place on earth for you to come to with your questions, your feelings, your struggles, what people at school are talking about, what you're thinking about. Don't go to Google first. Don't go to some kid on the playground first or in the locker room first. Come to me, and we'll talk about it together. And I might not always have the perfect answer, but I promise to be honest. I promise to be present. And if I don't have the answer, I will find it and we will talk about it. One of the greatest teaching opportunities happens when you see your kids doing something that's right and praising them, or in those moments when you see them showing disrespect. It's an opportunity to immediately step in and take corrective action. So if your son says something disrespectful to his mom, right then and there, you need to step in and you need to give corrective action. And that can be done in one of several ways. One thing I like to do is to not always say, I don't always just say, hey, don't disrespect your mom. Sometimes I will say, I don't allow anybody in this house to disrespect my wife, my partner, the most important person in my life, the one who's done more for all of us than anybody on earth. And I'm not going to stand for anybody to talk to her that way, because part of my role as a husband is to protect her and make sure that she receives the honor and the respect that she deserves. And right now, you're not giving her that. And so because of that, there are going to be, consequences that'll be appropriate and in measure to whatever the issue happened. I think too, though, we need to pull them aside and explain why it was disrespectful. Sometimes what happens is our kids are in a culture of disrespect. They see it on every show they watch. They see it and they hear it everywhere they go. There's just a kind of a scoffing, disrespectful tone in our culture that our kids are growing up in and just believing that that's normal. And so sometimes they might be behaving that way, not realizing how out of bounds it is. And instead of overreacting by just letting anger be the first response, we need to step in quickly and let them know that this is serious and we need to address it. But we also need to see it as an opportunity to correct the false messages that they're getting, saying that's disrespectful, here's why that's disrespectful, here's what respect would look like in this situation, and here's what we need to do moving forward. And then if the problem continues, if it becomes a pattern, then that's a whole separate disciplinary issue. But look at the first offense always as just an opportunity to teach. My book on raising boys who respect girls is really only half the conversation. The other half of the conversation is in the messages that we need to be teaching young ladies about respect, how to respect boys, how to respect themselves, and what respect in relationships really looks like. And while I'm not a father of daughters and I'm not the expert to speak into that directly, I would challenge those of you who are raising girls to have these conversations with them about what respect means, why she deserves a man who will respect her, what does it look like to be a lady who commands respect but is also one who shows respect, and to help lead her through that, because our young ladies are being given so many false messages in culture about what true femininity should be, about the strength and the beauty that God endowed women to have. Some of those very basic tenets of femininity and womanhood have been under attack in our culture, and it's a very confusing time for our daughters in the same way that it is for our sons on the other side. So we need to be intentional about having these conversations with our sons and with our daughters.